Y'all know what time it is? It's XP Billionaires time. All right. Welcome to the XP Billionaires podcast. This is Rafe speaking. We've got Sky and Irene with us. Sky, how are you today?
I'm all right.
That's just your usual general MO. I can't wait for a day when you say, I am fantastic. So,
Well, then we know that Sky has really been replaced by a body snatcher, and we should kill them.
I don't want to have to clean up that mess, though.
This is true.
Yeah.
Put a rug over it.
Fair enough. All right. And
Rug over it.
as you can hear from the maniacal laughter here, we've got Irene as well. How are you today?
I was going to respond in a slightly apathetic, like, it's all right. Rafe seems to have more energy than all of us, but I'm already broken. It's okay. Just the image of Rafe sitting in your apartment with like this giant lumpy rug that wasn't there before. One of your recliners is like sort of like off center and like askew because it can't quite lie flat on top of the lump, but yeah, it's still there.
Yeah.
And Rafe going, "No, it was always like that." The recliner always seated you so your head was positioned directly in the wall.
Obviously. All right, so we are in a very, very vocal mood, apparently, which is ironic given this week's topic. So why don't we get into that right off the bat, and let's have some discussions here. So RPGs have used many different ways to tell their story and to develop their characters. We've talked about on the show about both the linear narratives and storytelling that can branch out based on different choices that you make within the game. In all of this discussion, there's one method of characterization we've yet to discuss, but we're going to do that today. Our topic today is going to be about the Silent Protagonist, the hero of few to no words, but happens to just have that biggest impact on an RPG story. The Silent Protagonist can have dialogue options as long as they are few and far between, but the narrative revolves around him without much interaction for the majority of the game. So I figured we'd go up, have a little bit of a discussion. I'll ask a couple of questions and see what everyone thinks about what, if anything, makes this particular storytelling mechanic so successful. So the first question I have for everybody is just that. What makes the Silent Protagonist method successful or unsuccessful in your eyes? And this week we are going to start with Sky. So what do you think?
Well, for me, it has everything to do with the way the story is written. For example, is it a story where the themes suit a silent protagonist? The element I think is usually necessary is a loss of control. So we'll take my two favorite examples of silent protagonists. Tyr McDowell from Suikoden, Minato Arizato from Persona 3. They are both cases where the protagonist has little control in the events going on around them, despite being in leadership roles. So the silence, then, is a reflection of their inability to assert their own wishes, their own will. They are basically figureheads in vehicles for other things, sometimes quite literally. I mean, you take Tyr, for example. He's basically a figurehead commander with godlike magical power influencing his life. He, in the end, basically just says okay to almost everything his strategist says, right? Like he's the morale guy, basically. He doesn't really assert a lot of his own power beyond just agreeing with what other people come up with. And Minato's not that different. Getting into the specifics in his case involves massive spoilers. But he is at very least thrust into a leadership position he didn't ask for. He wasn't even on the surface qualified for, despite having the most powerful, well, he had multiple personas. That's why he ended up in that role. He wasn't the most experienced. He wasn't the oldest. It was all to do with just that power, and which he didn't ask for. He didn't didn't ask for the other thing that resides within him. Again, spoilers. And so it makes sense that these characters are silent because they are essentially vehicles for everything else going on. Vehicles for the story, vehicles for various forms of power, and therefore their speech is at least very limited, if not there at all.
I'm just gonna point out like a very like light spoiler right at the beginning where you have to like enter the protagonist's name. Like this is very much taken as, yeah, I'm gonna enter the name and everything's fine. But it's framed as Minato signing a contract. And it's not until much later that he understands what exactly it is he signed up for. He's basically not necessarily tricked, but like bamboozled as to the extent of what he has signed. The only clause in it is that he takes responsibility for his actions. And it's like, okay, well, fine, that seems pretty light. But as the story progresses and it gets to a certain point, the true scope of what that means is revealed to him. And even a particular character who very much knew what it meant from the beginning almost seems to express remorse at the fact that this is the way it has to be. Like, not even the person who owns the contract is particularly comfortable with it.
Yeah, but the thing is like the contract was ultimately a formality. Like, you think about it this way, the contract doesn't change the fact that certain something is riding along with him. It doesn't negate the fact that Minato can see the dark, is awake during the dark hour. Right? Like,
no, but it does sign him up for what is essentially a death march.
Sure. But, I mean, what else is he gonna do? Stick his head in the sand for the rest of his life?
I mean, that is an option.
It's not a very good one, though. And, well, think about it, though. Like,
it's not a great option, no. I'm just saying it's an option.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, do you want to die peacefully or do you want to die screaming? And it's like he was signed up for die screaming immediately.
Yeah. But the thing is that, I mean, could you imagine, let's put it this way, he would have been, it would have destroyed him to not do anything. To not have any answers, no explanations for what's happening to him. Like, those are the sorts of situations that basically destroy people's mental health. It's a non-choice in many ways. And I think that even if he had walked out the door that day and said to hell with all this, it would have caught up with him eventually.
Oh, probably. However, I will point out that the contract holder is very much of the opinion it's like, I know I made you sign this and you've gotten this far, and I kind of feel bad that I couldn't tell you the full scope of what this would mean when you signed up for this. Because it's arguably like we're having an argument over which one is better. And the argument is both of them suck.
Well, that's it exactly. I mean,
he had no good option, and it's like, well, I took one of the bad options away from you, and it's difficult to say with any certainty which one he would have picked under his own without any magical contract in place. Because, like, what do you even do with a choice like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, in my opinion, signing the contract was the only really feasible options if he wanted any peace of mind. So,
yeah. I agree. I just think it's like here are two very shitty options, and even the person who presented the contract is like, I feel bad about taking one of them away from you.
But the thing is, though, you're to loop this back around again, like, it's all about loss of control, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Doesn't mean they have to be okay
give
with
you
it.
it's a false, it's a false choice. And that's one of the reasons why Minato is effective as a silent protagonist, because their silence, reflects the fact that they are a tool of the narrative, that they are a tool of things beyond, maybe not necessarily their comprehension, but of forces that they don't necessarily understand the scope of. What is particularly effective is typically they go from having no control over their circumstances to being able to assert some control. But yeah, I mean, I'm essentially done. Somebody else talk.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great explanation, and I like that option. And yeah, let's just keep it going. Irene, what's your take on the silent protagonist?
So for me, a great silent protagonist is one whose personality shines through despite the lack of spoken dialogue. So, for example, this is achieved through like more robust choice options than a simpler yes or no, like in Breath of the Wild. So, essentially, they boil down to yes or no options, but they're not presented that way. And you're never given. Link doesn't speak unless he is responding to a choice, essentially, right? So rather than presented as yes or no, if Link agrees to a quest that is tedious, your response options can be something like, if I have to, or okay, I guess. Like, they're versus when he's all on board, it's like, sounds great, let's do it. Like, there's a point in the game actually where he comes across an NPC who is like, oh my god, you scared me. And his response, the only response you're allowed to select, is what you doing? And it's how it's spelled as well, is what you doing, rather than what are you doing. So it kind of gives him this sort of like casual, sort of free spirit personality that shines through even with the few dialogue options. And you've also got like the facial expressions in the cutscenes as well that add a little bit to it. And the limited vocalizations that they have also help fill it with fill this character with almost this like breathless sense of wonder and adventure. Like, he has been given the shittiest of shitty tasks. He has to run at this horrible giant thing, otherwise everyone is going to die again, because it's heavily implied in Breath of the Wild that he's already fucked up once. With no memories, but it's like he doesn't necessarily begrudge it constantly because he gets to see the world. And you can sort of get that sense of like sort of, impish delight at being able to go off and actually explore everything. It's really interesting. And I'm also going to go back a little bit to the Persona games, because you do see the characterization shine through as well in those games. Like, I've played 3, 4, and 5, and Minato feels different from you, who feels different from Akira. Their dialogue options are written slightly differently in ways that give them just that little bit of characterization. So, like, one is decidedly the least social, but trying very, very hard in order to seem normal. Then there's the other, who is a more warm and gentle, like, regular person who is trying to make the best of a weird situation. And then you have the secret adrenaline junkie who, despite not being a delinquent, happily walks that line between like normal good kid and adventurous spirited individual. And this is all achieved with the choice responses that the player can make, facial expressions, movement. So even though there's not a lot of dialogue, the way that they frame those little responses adds a lot of personality to them. And I really appreciate that. So even though the protagonist is silent, they're not empty.
And that's really what we're looking for too. Like we want to make sure that when we're doing this, it's like you said, like they're not just some empty hollow of a shell. That actually kind of leads me into like part of my choices, which I'll get into in a sec. But yeah, just like for that, like the success for me rests a lot on how everyone else in the world interacts with the protagonist. So, for example, the party should be talking at the protagonist, not necessarily always directly asking questions unless they want to put in a choice option. But if they don't do that, then it becomes a bit of a failing. But they are also interpreting what the silent protagonist is likely to say in response to a conversation or question. But where this can fail is when these interactions have the party speaking on the silent protagonist's behalf. And this was actually noticed a lot when I was playing Dragon Quest XI, where the Luminary, who is this important figure, the Messiah who is supposed to save the world from the oncoming darkness, basically had a team of people answering all the questions that were directed specifically at him. This could have just as easily been corrected if the questions were being asked to the whole party as opposed to just one person. And that was something that, unfortunately, I saw quite a bit throughout the game. And not only that, like going back to your empty shell option, is that he was also very stoic all the time. So there was some emotion there, but it wasn't as heavy as it needed to be. Like
I will agree with that, because that right at the beginning, like he's like, I'm not gonna slight spoiler, but it is literally within like the first hour of the game. Somebody looks at him and goes, "You're the Messiah," and he's like, "Kay." And I'm like, what the fuck is this?
But you know what? Later on in the game too. Now this would be a massive spoiler, so I'm just not going to get into it because I also know, Irene, you haven't gotten there yet. But there is probably one of the most tragic points in this game. Everyone else is like heartbroken and tearing up, and he's just standing there. Well, this major, issue with expressing the silent protagonist's emotions was a lot harder to do in older gen RPGs. Like at this point, it's not excusable in today's gaming world. Heroes are allowed to emote, especially when they do not speak. So that's my take on the whole thing. Like I decided to focus a little more on the failings rather than the successes, but this is, it's necessary.
I'm going to say that there's no excuse for not doing it, because like, I know you guys don't play first person shooters, but I played a little bit of Doom that came out like a few years ago. The Doom Marine is first person. You only see his arm, but he expresses how few solitary fucks he gives about the story, only using the bits of him you can see.
Yeah.
So there's really no excuse for not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so let's get to the real question that is on everybody's mind at this point. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer the silent protagonist, or do you prefer the more scripted protagonist with either decision making skills or just with his or her own story? Sky, what do you prefer?
I prefer whatever is most appropriate for the story being told. I do find the silent protagonist easier to empathize with, as I relate pretty strongly to not having control over one's life. And before I go down that particularly nasty rabbit hole, someone else talk.
Fair enough. Irene, what say you?
What say me? Well, I have no preference so long as it fits. So I've played games where the silent protagonist was an obviously lazy cop-out for having to write a main character, and those are never good. I am looking straight at you, Tales of the World. That was bad. I would much rather have a poorly fleshed out, like scripted character in that position than a silent one who is clearly there because the writers couldn't be bothered. Both of them are bad, but at least one of them doesn't feel like, a zombie going through the world and just having things like happen around them that they're not even loosely connected to. In fact, this can be achieved with a scripted protagonist very much to the same way. See Vaughn from Final Fantasy XII. The story's about Balthier and Ash. I have no fucking clue what Vaughn and Penelo are doing there. To this day, they are unnecessary to the story, and yet he is somehow presented as the main character. It is a baffling decision to me to center the story on this one kid who is arguably way less important to the overall plot. It feels very much like Square Enix at the time was like, this story is about Ash, the princess, but we can't make her the main character. That's what it feels like. Anyway, I'm ranting. But even then, like as I said, even then I probably still wouldn't give the game a ton of praise because lazy characterization's also bad. I don't care what direction you take it so much as long as you're going to make them memorable and make them a character. I want to see the Doom Marine, giving few solitary fucks about the story by immediately shoving away like screens and like ignoring exposition and clearly playing and cleaning his guns while somebody is like, okay, so this is why you need to be doing this, and he just really doesn't care.
Yeah.
And if not a silent protagonist who has characterization, give me a scripted protagonist like Velvet from Tales of Berseria. Like, a complex character that develops over time and changes. Like, scripts are an opportunity for the character to show more complex development, so they should be used. If you're not going to use them, don't use it as a lazy cop-out to just not write a character.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting you mentioned the part about Final Fantasy XII with Vaughn and Penelo, for example. It actually paralleled me to another game that I was thinking of that I just thought about, White Knight Chronicles. This is a level 5 title, an action RPG that had come out. It was an interesting game that it followed the story of, the main character. However, it had to create a character system for your main playable. You were his ward. So you were just experiencing the story through that person's eyes, but you were a silent protagonist in and of itself. So I feel like maybe Final Fantasy XII was trying to do that and failed, whereas I think White Knight Chronicles actually succeeded in this task.
Yeah, but Vaughn and Ash were like, they were connected by happenstance. Balthier and Ash actually had a much more story and narrative reason to be traveling together. Vaughn was just like, I want to be a sky pirate. And met Ash completely by accident.
Yeah, you're right. And that's why I'm saying it failed to do what White Knight Chronicles succeeded at. Like, we got to go through this entire story, but you got to have your own character, build him the way you wanted to. But, in the first game, you didn't even get one of the cool giant armors that everyone else got to have. You were just there along for the ride. But so you were just witnessing the story unfold, but you also had to make a lot of the decisions, taking side quests, things like that. It just worked out better.
And maybe that's what they were trying to do with Final Fantasy XII, but like, I think the protagonist was too tangentially related to the story in the end, because Final Fantasy XII, despite being very different, I quite liked Final Fantasy XII for its combat system, its challenging fights, and some of the really cool like Esper battles, and like there was a lot to like in that game. I just really thought it was strange that you had this protagonist who the story could basically proceed without completely. And I would have thought, like, well, if you need a male protagonist, make it Balthier. He's at least fun. Balthier is awesome! And he's central to the story! So it very much feels like, yeah, they were trying to do this, like, witness the story through a different character's eyes, but Vaughn had so little to offer that it was like, I don't know. It felt like I didn't quite understand why he was there, why Penelo was there, to be honest, either. Like, both of them, I could have, like, him and his best friend, because of course he has to have a girl best friend character, because of course he does!
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not what we're talking about.
Yeah. As for me, like in the end, like I gotta say that I actually prefer the scripted protagonist more. And that's not to say I have any disdain for a silent protagonist. And when it's done right, like it's incredibly effective. Like for me, I just prefer conversations where, everyone is involved. Sometimes it's just better to hear someone's opinion at the time it's happening rather than interpret it from someone else in the scene. And again, like I said, that there's nothing wrong with the system. This is just really just something I tend to prefer. Like playing Trails of Cold Steel right now, I think if Reen were a silent protagonist, I don't think I'd like him as much.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it totally depends on context and what makes sense for the story. Sometimes you want someone who's a step removed, depending on what's going on. The idea, though, is to make it a step, not 5 steps removed. That's the
Yeah.
difference. Like that's the thing with something like Final Fantasy 12. Like they made the protagonist too removed from the character, too removed from the characters that the game was actually based around. But you look at other examples like Batten Kaitos, Eternal Wings and the Lost Ocean, in particular, the first one, where you do not, while you control Callus as your character on screen, you are not Callus. You are the guardian spirit traveling with him. That may not seem like a big step away until you get partway through the story and realizes it's a gigantic step away. And there are things you don't know because you are not Callus. And similarly, you get cases where the protagonist plays the straight man to everyone else's crazy. I mean, uh, Mana Khemia works in this way to a certain extent. Vane has his own issues going on, but compared to everyone else, he's pretty chill.
But yeah, I mean, if emo
So,
is chill, yeah.
and the same, you can also look at something like the Archanelico games, where the protagonist is, the male protector of the Raventails. Well, I'm sorry, but the story is about the Raventails. It's all about them. But the thing is, the male protagonist is the one that connects all the Raventails together. So, again, can be done very effectively. Anyway, we're not even on topic anymore, so why don't we finish off?
Nope.
Fair enough. Yeah,
I'm
so that
sorry.
it's
Not
fine.
sorry.
Yeah. Um
That's okay. You got off your soapbox. I got on mine, apparently.
We just traded places.
Yeah. All
Yep.
right. I think we've said all we can say at this point about the silent protagonist, at least for now. Obviously, it's something we could revisit in the future, but for now, I think we've got a good grasp on having a good discussion about it. So we're gonna end it off here. Let me know what silent protagonists you have enjoyed in your RPGs. You can send that to any of us. You can find me at Billionaires XP on Twitter, and don't forget to check me out on Twitch at Rafe Thegrim on Wednesday nights. Sky, where are you?
I'm at Skyknight XP on Twitter and Twitch. I stream on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
All right, and Irene, whereabouts are you?
I'm at irogue_XP on Twitter and irogue_XP on Twitch, and I stream on not scream stream on Thursday nights at 7 p.m.
And let's all not forget about Hannah Bard, who's working hard. They're working on our transcripts, and you'll see that for this episode up within the next few days on our WordPress site. That's xpbillionaires.wordpress.com. You'll be able to find our articles and all of our podcasts available there as well. And again, if you're ever in the generous mood, feel free to send us a donation if you like us. We're on Coffee at coffee.com/xpbillionaires. All right, that's it for this week. Everybody keep gaming, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.